Kill the player or pull the punch? That's the question. This week, we discuss whether it's best to end that player's adventuring career or let them live to fight another day. Hello players and GMs, I am Reese and welcome to another video by Jetpack7. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind everyone that we have begun showing off some beta releases for our next book, Blackstorm Realms. If you supported our Kickstarter to at least the beta backer level, you can gain access to those on our website, but if you didn't, follow the link in the description to learn how to gain access. You don't want to miss this setting, so be sure to keep an eye out for its eventual release. This week, I wanted to discuss a classic debate that has been present since D&D's conception. Should the DM kill their player characters, or should they pull the punch if possible? Now, I've gone back and forth on this topic myself, sometimes leaning towards a more forgiving style of DMing, and other times feeling like I needed to inspire fear in the hearts of my players. The best way to come to a solid conclusion, though, is to hear both sides of the argument, so let's jump right into it, starting with the forgiving DM. Thanks, Reese. My argument is a simple one. If you have the opportunity, which you usually do, you should pull the punch and give your players a chance to survive. And this comes from a place that, to me, is the very core of Dungeons & Dragons, as well as tabletop RPGs in general. The game is about the players. It isn't an opportunity for the DM to assert themselves as a dominant force and inspire fear in the hearts of their players. It is an opportunity for DMs to give the players a fun and exciting gaming experience and allow them to actually play in the world, which becomes rather difficult to do when they're dead. Now, you may say they can just create a new character, but we all know that oftentimes bringing in a new character to an already established group isn't as smooth as we would like. You've spent all this time building up the relationship between the party and the character you lost that bringing in a new character feels almost hollow, so even though it technically is a solution, it can lead to a less satisfying gaming experience, which, like I said before, is the job of the DM to maintain. All of that awkwardness can be avoided if you just let the character live in the first place. Killing a character literally just boils down to not letting that player play the character they want to play. And even though you may not be doing it maliciously, the ends are the same. Your good intentions don't change the fact that your player now has to stop playing the character that they created. I know what many of you may be thinking. What about Resurrection? And yes, Resurrection is obviously a reasonable choice. If you're the DM and you know that there is an opportunity for Resurrection and that the Resurrection is guaranteed to work, then I don't think you're really killing the character in that situation. Death in D&D is not the same as death in real life. Truly killing a character in D&D is when you kill them off and there's a solid chance that they won't come back. Pulling your punch is when, even if there is no pre-established resurrection chance, you offer one to them after the fact. For example, if a player character gets killed, you can send your party on a mission to resurrect that character, which the party will almost certainly succeed on. That, to me, feels like a forgiving and merciful style of DMing, and removes the risk of forcing your player to roll a new character. And honestly, this is the style of DMing I'm talking about. So now, not only are you letting your player continue to play as their character, you're also giving your party another adventure to go on that carries some pretty heavy implications. This more forgiving method of DMing is a win-win. Your party can keep its chemistry and continue building its story, but they also have to deal with some slight consequences of the adventuring life. Straight up, just killing your party removes both of those options and, at the end of the day, leads to a much less fulfilling experience overall. Thanks, Reese. I see your points, but I strongly disagree. A world without death is a world without stakes. Of course, we can try to create a false sense of urgency with saving a village or even the world, but as a player of this game, the truest sense of loss comes from losing a player character, permanently. We can invest ourselves in this game as much as we want, but we can't actually convince ourselves that the game we are playing is any more than just that, a game. Losing an NPC or whatever may be sad, but it doesn't actually have an impact on the state of the players. The only thing that truly creates a feeling of loss is the loss of a player character. Now, I'm not saying throw your players into a murder dungeon every single session. Just like anything else, character deaths get stale if they're handed out too often. The thrilling part of running a game in which real, permanent death is a possibility is the knowledge that your character's presence in this game is truly temporary, and a careless action could result in losing them. The reason allowing a character death is so necessary is not because of the death itself, rather the impact that the possibility of death has on the behavior of the players. The moment you pull the punch from certain death of a character is usually very obvious to the players, barring fudging a dice roll or something hidden that they don't know about. And the moment they know that you're trying to protect their characters, it's going to relieve a significant amount of pressure and take away from the true gravity of the situation. The possibility of death creates a sense of urgency in tense situations that doesn't exist otherwise, and on the opposite end of the spectrum, it also creates an extremely freeing sense of relief when the characters are actually safe from danger. Creating a more emotionally dynamic game state is only possible if there are actually permanent risks involved. The lows of terrifying combat with heavy stakes juxtaposed with the highs of a truly risk-free shopping episode or heartwarming RP conversation simply creates a more vibrant narrative overall. Truncating the lows will also cut short the highs. It may sound dark, but joy is much duller if there has been nothing to contrast against it. Death sucks, and that is precisely why the threat of its existence is necessary for a more exciting game. Well, I have heard both sides, and I have to say, I am siding pretty heavily with Mr. Death over there. With a couple asterisks, however. I agree that character death should be a real, looming threat in a campaign. I think establishing early on that you're not going to give your players a free pass in deadly situations is a healthy precedent to set. Like he said, it creates a much more dynamic experience when the players all know in the back of their minds that their character's life is not guaranteed. That said, there are ways to establish that threat of death without outright murdering your player characters. My personal favorite homebrewed rule is the resurrection rule used by Critical Role. For those unfamiliar with it, it's essentially a series of checks by players to determine the resurrection DC. Once all the checks are done, the DM determines the DC and rolls a straight D20, no additions or anything. If it passes, the character returns to life and the DC is a little higher than next time they die. If it fails, that character is dead forever. This ritual heavily favors the dead player, because the DC can potentially get down to 1. That said, I've rolled a nat 1 on that ritual before, so even though the players did everything right and succeeded on all the necessary checks, the character still died permanently. I love this rule for a couple different reasons. First of all, it gives awesome role-playing opportunities as the player characters get to plead in whatever way they choose for the gods to bring their fallen ally back to life. In addition, it gives the players that looming threat of permanent loss that we've been talking about. Even if everything goes right, there is that small chance that the death is permanent. Resurrection rule aside, some of the most beautiful moments I've ever experienced in a campaign resulted from the loss of a player character, and often the subsequent resurrection of that player character. And the reason the moments felt so raw and visceral is due in large part to the possibility that the character in question is gone forever. It may be extremely sad to lose a player character, and it may be inconvenient to have to work to reform the party chemistry with a new character, but with a little coordination from the DM and open-mindedness from your party, I think it is absolutely worth your while to allow player characters to be lost to the abyss for good. Alright, that is where I stand on this argument. I hope this helped you all decide where you stand as well. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on this ever-present debate. If you liked this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel, and as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you around.